The early morning sun was just beginning to peek through the windows of the corner cafe, casting long shadows across the freshly mopped floors. The smell of coffee and warm pastries filled the air as Maria, a petite waitress with kind eyes and dark hair pulled back in a messy bun, started her morning routine. She'd been working at this downtown Boston cafe for the past 3 years, and despite the early hours and aching feet, she genuinely loved her job. Life hadn't been easy for Maria lately. Her rent had gone up again, and she was still paying off her mother's medical bills from last year. But you'd never know it from her warm smile and gentle demeanor. She had this special way of making every customer feel like they were the most important person in the room. That particular autumn morning started like any other. The regular customers trickled in, the rushed business people grabbing their coffee to go, the retired couple who always shared a chocolate croissant, and the college students with their laptops and textbooks spread across the tables. Maria knew all their orders by heart, and more importantly, she knew their stories. "Good morning, Mrs. Chen," she called out cheerfully to the elderly woman who taught piano lessons down the street. "Your usual chamomile tea coming right up." The old woman's face lit up at being remembered, just as it did every morning. Between refilling coffee cups and taking orders, Maria would sometimes catch glimpses of her reflection in the cafe's windows. She saw a young woman in a slightly worn uniform, dark circles under her eyes from working double shifts, but there was something else there too. A determination that wouldn't quit. At 28, she wasn't where she'd imagined she'd be in life, but she held on to hope that things would get better. The morning rush was in full swing when her coworker, Lily, called in sick. This meant Maria had to handle twice as many tables, but she didn't complain. Instead, she took a deep breath, tied her apron a little tighter, and moved through the cafe with graceful efficiency. "Order up," Randy, the cook, called from the kitchen. His voice carried over the clinking of plates and the gentle hum of conversation. Maria balanced 3 plates of steaming breakfast skillets on her arm, delivering them to a table of construction workers who always left her generous tips, not because they had much to spare, but because they appreciated how she remembered their names and asked about their families. As the morning wore on, Maria noticed the sky outside growing darker. Storm clouds were rolling in, and the weather report had predicted heavy rain. She started placing extra mats by the door and making sure the umbrella stand was full, thinking about how the weather might affect the lunch rush. What Maria didn't know was that this rainy day would bring someone into the cafe who would change her life forever. But for now, she continued her routine, wiping down tables, refreshing coffee cups, and sharing genuine smiles with everyone who walked through the door. She paused for a moment near the window, watching as the first raindrops began to fall. The street outside was getting busier as people hurried to get indoors before the storm hit. Maria grabbed the coffee pot and made another round through her section, unaware that in just a few minutes, an encounter would set in motion events that would transform not only her life, but the lives of countless others. The air was thick with anticipation, though no one in the cozy cafe could have predicted what was about to unfold. Even the most ordinary days can hold extraordinary surprises, and this day, this perfectly normal, rainy day, was about to become anything but ordinary for the hard-working waitress with the kind eyes and unwavering spirit. The rain was coming down harder now, drumming against the cafe's windows and creating tiny rivers on the sidewalk outside. Maria had just finished serving a young couple their breakfast when she noticed him, an elderly man standing just outside the cafe's entrance, hesitating beneath the awning. His clothes were worn and weathered, his gray beard unkempt, but there was something in his posture that caught her attention. The man finally pushed open the door, bringing with him the smell of rain and the cool autumn air. A few customers glanced up, then quickly looked away, some pulling their bags closer or shifting uncomfortably in their seats. He stood there, water dripping from his tattered coat onto the welcome mat, looking lost and uncertain. The cafe had fallen oddly quiet, with only the soft clinking of cutlery and the whirring of the coffee machine breaking the silence. Maria noticed how the man's eyes darted around the room, as if trying to decide whether he should stay or go. His shoes were badly worn, with holes that must have let the rain soak through to his feet. Without hesitation, Maria grabbed a clean menu and walked over to him. "Welcome to Corner Cafe," she said warmly, just as she would to any other customer. "Would you like to sit at the counter, or would you prefer a table?" The relief in the man's eyes was immediate and touching. "The counter, if it's no trouble," he replied softly, his voice carrying an unexpected refinement despite his appearance. As he settled onto one of the worn leather stools, Maria noticed his hands. They were clean and his nails well kept, a striking contrast to his shabby appearance. A few customers were still staring, and Maria could hear whispers from the corner table. She positioned herself between them and the man, creating a small barrier of privacy. "Can I start you off with some hot coffee?" she asked. "It's a perfect day for it." The man nodded, pulling out a small plastic container from his pocket. Inside were various coins, mostly pennies and nickels, that he began to count carefully. "How much would that be?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Maria watched as his weathered fingers moved slowly over the coins. There was something about his movements that seemed practiced, almost elegant, despite their shakiness. She thought about her own struggles, about the times when she counted out change for gas or groceries. "The first cup's on the house today," she said quietly. "It's our rainy day special." It wasn't really, but Randy in a kitchen always turned a blind eye when Maria occasionally helped someone in need. The man looked up at her, and for a moment their eyes met. His were a striking blue, clear and intelligent, with a depth that seemed to hold 1,000 stories. "That's very kind of you," he said, carefully putting his coins away. As Maria poured his coffee, she noticed how he sat, straight-backed, with his hands folded neatly on the counter. It reminded her of her grandfather, who'd always said you could tell a person's character by how they carried themselves, regardless of their circumstances. The rich aroma of fresh coffee rose between them as she placed the cup before him. He wrapped his hands around it, savoring the warmth. The rain continued to fall outside, creating a cozy atmosphere inside the cafe. Other customers had returned to their conversations and meals, the momentary tension dissolving into the routine morning buzz. Maria went about her other duties but kept an eye on the man. She noticed how carefully he sipped his coffee, how he seemed to be taking in every detail of his surroundings. There was something different about him, something she couldn't quite put her finger on. It wasn't just the contrast between his refined manners and his worn appearance. It was something in his eyes, a kind of quiet dignity that spoke of a different life, a different time. Little did Maria know, but this moment, this simple act of kindness on a rainy morning, was about to set in motion events that would change not only her life, but the lives of countless others. Sometimes the biggest changes start with the smallest gestures, like a cup of coffee offered with kindness to a stranger on a rainy day. The morning rush had slowed down, and Maria found herself drawn back to the elderly man at the counter. His coffee cup was nearly empty, and she noticed how he kept glancing at the breakfast menu, then back at his small container of coins. The way he held himself, despite his worn clothes, made her think of a king who had lost his crown but kept his dignity. "Our breakfast special today is really good," she said, approaching him with the coffee pot. "It comes with eggs, hash browns, and toast." She refilled his cup without asking, pretending not to notice his surprised look. The kitchen always made extra food anyway, and Randy often let the staff take home leftovers at the end of their shift. "Oh, he began, his hands moving toward his pocket where she knew the container of coins was. "I'm afraid I should probably just stick to the coffee." His stomach growled softly, betraying his words, and a slight flush colored his cheeks. Maria thought about all the times people had helped her. The neighbor who used to watch her little brother for free while their mom worked 2 jobs, the teacher who'd bought her school supplies when they couldn't afford them, the stranger who'd paid for her gas when her card was declined. Sometimes kindness was meant to be passed on. Actually, she said, lowering her voice, we have a policy about first-time customers on rainy days. The breakfast special comes with the coffee. It wasn't true, of course, but she'd use her employee meal allowance. She'd just skip lunch today. It wouldn't be the first time. The man looked up at her, those striking blue eyes studying her face. For a moment, she thought she saw them glisten with tears. "Young lady," he said softly, "why would you show such kindness to someone like me?" Maria smiled, already writing down his order. "Because someone once told me that kindness is the only thing that multiplies when you share it." It was something her grandmother used to say, and living by those words had never steered her wrong. She watched from the corner of her eye as he ate his breakfast, noting how he used his napkin with perfect manners and cut his food with the precision of someone who had dined in fine restaurants. Every few bites, he would pause and seem to savor the simple meal as if it were a gourmet feast. The rain outside had settled into a gentle drizzle, and the cafe had that peaceful mid-morning lull. A few regular customers who had witnessed her interaction with the man gave her approving smiles. Mrs. Chen, the piano teacher, even slipped an extra $1 into her tip when she left, squeezing Maria's hand warmly. When the man finished eating, he carefully wiped his mouth and folded the napkin neatly beside his empty plate. "That was the best meal I've had in a very long time," he said, his voice thick with emotion. Not just because of the food, but because of the kindness with which it was served. He reached into his coat and pulled out his container of coins. Despite Maria's protests, he insisted on leaving them all as a tip. "It's not much," he said, "but it's what I can give." There was something in the way he said it, a hint of irony perhaps, that she didn't quite understand. As he stood to leave, he turned back to her. "What's your name?" he asked. When she told him, he repeated it softly, as if committing it to memory. "Thank you, Maria. You've given me more than just a meal today. You've given me hope." She watched as he walked out into the drizzly day, his shoulders straighter than when he'd come in. Something told her this wouldn't be the last time she'd see him. She gathered his dishes, finding the neat stack of coins he'd left, probably no more than $2 in total, and felt a warmth in her heart that had nothing to do with the value of the tip. What Maria didn't realize was that her simple act of kindness had just been witnessed by someone who had the power to change lives. The man in the worn coat had seen something in her that morning, something rare and precious in today's world, and he had made a decision that would soon transform both their lives in ways she could never imagine. Days turned into weeks, and the mysterious man, who had told Maria to call him Tom, became a regular visitor at the corner cafe. He would always arrive just as the morning rush was winding down, taking his usual spot at the counter. Though his clothes remained worn, Maria noticed they were cleaner now, as if he was making an extra effort. Each visit brought new discoveries. Tom would share little pieces of wisdom that made Maria wonder about his past. One morning, while she poured his coffee, he casually mentioned something about the stock market that sounded like it came from years of first-hand experience. Another time, he gave her advice about investing that seemed far too knowledgeable for someone living on the streets. "You know," he said one crisp morning, watching her juggle multiple orders, "the secret to success isn't just hard work. It's about seeing opportunities others miss." His eyes twinkled as he spoke, reminding Maria of her grandfather. Like that empty wall space over there, it could be perfect for displaying local artists' work. Might bring in a different crowd during slow hours. Maria found herself looking forward to their conversations. Between serving other customers, she would stop by his spot at the counter, sharing stories about her dreams of someday owning her own restaurant. Tom listened with genuine interest, asking questions that made her think deeper about her plans. "Why this location?" he asked one day, gesturing around the cafe. "What makes it special?" When Maria explained how the neighborhood was changing, with new offices being built nearby, he nodded approvingly. "Good observation. Location and timing. They're everything in business." The other regulars began to warm up to Tom too. Mrs. Chen would sometimes sit next to him, and they would talk about classical music. Maria overheard him once explaining the intricacies of a batch composition with the expertise of a music professor. The college students noticed how he could help them with their business homework, offering real-world examples that made their textbook theories come alive. One rainy morning, similar to the day he first arrived, Tom seemed particularly thoughtful. "You've never asked me why I'm on the streets," he said quietly as Maria refilled his cup. She smiled, wiping down the counter. "Everyone has their story," she replied. "You'll share yours when you're ready." Her response seemed to touch him deeply. "You know," he said, his voice slightly shaky, "I've been watching how you treat everyone who comes in here. Not just me, everyone. The businessman having a bad day, the single mom counting pennies for her coffee, the teenagers who can only afford to split a muffin." Maria blushed, not used to such direct praise. "It's nothing special," she said, but Tom shook his head. "That's where you're wrong. It is special. Very special indeed." There was something in his voice that made her look at him more closely. That morning, he stayed longer than usual. He watched as she handled a difficult customer with grace, calmed a crying child with a free cookie, and helped an elderly woman to her car in the rain. All the while, he took notes in a small notebook he pulled from his coat pocket. Before leaving, he paused at the door. "Maria," he said, "do you believe in second chances?" The question caught her off guard. "Of course," she replied. "Everyone deserves a second chance." He smiled, a knowing look in his eyes. "Yes, they do. And sometimes those second chances come in unexpected ways." As she watched him walk away, Maria couldn't shake the feeling that something was different about today's visit. There was a purposefulness in his step that she hadn't seen before, a slight straightening of his shoulders that suggested a decision had been made. What she didn't know was that Tom had indeed made a decision, one that would prove her simple philosophy about kindness and second chances more right than she could ever imagine. The next time he walked through those cafe doors, everything would change, not just for Maria, but for everyone whose lives she had touched with her quiet, consistent kindness. The next morning started differently at Corner Cafe. The usual breakfast crowd was there, but there was an unfamiliar black car parked outside, the kind that spoke of luxury and importance. Maria was filling the coffee maker when she heard the bell above the door chime. She turned, coffee pot in hand, and nearly dropped it. There stood Tom, but not the Tom she knew. Gone were the worn clothes and weathered coat. Instead, he wore a perfectly tailored, dark blue suit that probably cost more than she made in 3 months. His gray hair was neatly trimmed, his beard groomed, and he carried himself with an authority that commanded attention. The cafe fell silent. Even the sizzling from the kitchen seemed to quiet down as Randy poked his head through the service window, mouth open in surprise. Next to Tom stood a woman in a business suit, carrying a leather briefcase and wearing glasses that looked like they cost a week's worth of tips. "Good morning, Maria," Tom said, his familiar warm smile the only thing unchanged about him. His voice carried through the quiet cafe, still gentle but now filled with a quiet power she'd never noticed before. "I believe my usual spot at the counter is free." Maria's hands trembled slightly as she watched them sit down. The other customers were trying their best not to stare, but failing miserably. Mrs. Chen had completely forgotten about her tea, which was now steeping far too long. "I suppose you're wondering what's going on," Tom said as Maria automatically reached for the coffee pot. "Please, sit with us for a moment." He gestured to the empty stool beside him. The woman with him was already pulling papers from her briefcase. "I haven't been entirely honest with you," Tom continued, his blue eyes twinkling with that familiar kindness. "My name is Thomas Richardson I. I am the CEO of Richardson Global Enterprises." He paused, letting the information sink in. Maria felt her knees go weak as she recognized the name of one of the largest technology companies in the country. But why? Was all she could manage to say. Tom's face softened with emotion. 6 months ago, I lost my wife of 40 years, he explained, his voice growing quieter. Helen was my everything. After she passed, I found myself losing faith in humanity. Everything seemed cold, businesslike, transactional. He took a deep breath. So I decided to conduct an experiment. I wanted to see if genuine kindness still existed in today's world. The woman beside him, who Tom introduced as his lawyer, was arranging papers on the counter. I visited dozens of establishments across the city, Tom continued. I've interacted with hundreds of people, but nowhere and no one showed the consistent, genuine compassion that you did, Maria. But I didn't do anything special, Maria protested, feeling overwhelmed. I just treated you like I treat everyone. Exactly, Tom smiled. That's what makes it extraordinary. You showed me kindness not because of who I might be, but simply because I was another human being in need. You gave me hope when I'd lost it. You reminded me why Helen and I started our charitable foundation in the first place. The lawyer cleared her throat gently, sliding some papers across the counter. Mr. Richardson has made some changes to his will and business structures, she explained. He would like to offer you an opportunity. Maria looked at the papers, then back at Tom, her mind spinning. The man she'd been serving coffee to, worrying about, treating with simple kindness, was actually a billionaire? It seemed impossible, yet somehow, looking at him now, it made perfect sense. The way he spoke, his knowledge, his perfect manners. You showed me that true kindness still exists in this world, Tom said softly. Now I want to help you show others. The world needs more people like you, Maria. More places like this cafe, where everyone is treated with dignity regardless of their circumstances. As Maria sat there, trying to process everything, she didn't realize that her simple acts of kindness were about to be multiplied beyond her wildest dreams. The papers in front of her would change not only her life, but the lives of countless others. All because she had chosen to be kind to a stranger on a rainy morning. The papers in front of Maria seemed to blur as happy tears filled her eyes. Tom, or Mr. Richardson, though he insisted she continue calling him Tom, patiently explained everything while the rest of the cafe sat in stunned silence, everyone straining to hear this incredible turn of events. You see, Tom said, his voice gentle but clear, I've spent the last few weeks not just observing you, but watching how this cafe works. How it serves as a heart for this community. He gestured around at the familiar faces, the college students, Mrs. Chen, the construction workers at their usual table. And I've made a decision. The lawyer, Mrs. Patterson, pulled out more documents. Mr. Richardson would like to establish a trust, she explained, with you as the primary beneficiary. This trust will include ownership of this building and sufficient funds to renovate and expand the cafe. Maria's hands trembled as she looked at the numbers on the page. They couldn't be real. But this is millions of dollars, she whispered, her voice shaking. Indeed it is, Tom smiled, looking more alive than she'd ever seen him. But there's a vision behind it. You see, I don't just want to give you a cafe. I want to help you create something bigger. A chain of community-focused restaurants that will provide opportunities for others like myself, people who need a second chance. Randy, who had been listening from the kitchen, let out a low whistle. Mrs. Chen was dabbing at her eyes with a napkin, and even the usually rowdy construction workers were sitting in respectful silence. The plan, Tom continued, is to transform this cafe into a model for others. We'll provide job training for homeless individuals, create a pay-it-forward program for meals, and establish a foundation to help other small businesses in the community. His eyes sparkled with excitement. And you, Maria, will be in charge of it all. The lawyer began explaining the details, how the trust would work, the business structure, the training programs they would establish. But Maria could hardly focus on the technical aspects. Her mind was spinning with possibilities. But why me? She finally managed to ask. I'm just a waitress. I don't know how to run something like this. Tom reached out and patted her hand, reminding her of all those mornings when he'd been just another customer at her counter. You're not just a waitress, he said firmly. You're someone who understands what it means to treat people with dignity. You have the heart this project needs. As for the business side, he smiled. Well, that's why I'll be staying on as your mentor. The other customers in the cafe began to applaud spontaneously. Mrs. Chen stood up and hugged Maria, tears streaming down her face. Randy emerged from the kitchen, still wearing his apron, grinning from ear to ear. There's one more thing, Tom said, reaching into his suit jacket. He pulled out the small container of coins, the same one he'd used to pay for his coffee those first few weeks. I kept this as a reminder of how it felt to be treated with kindness when I appeared to have nothing to offer. He placed it on the counter between them. I'd like it to be displayed in the new cafe to remind everyone that kindness has a value beyond money. Maria picked up the container, remembering how her heart had ached when she first saw him counting those coins. Now she understood. It had all been a test, but not the kind that felt manipulative or cruel. It had been a test of humanity, of kindness, of seeing the dignity in every person who walked through the door. So, Tom said, his eyes twinkling with that familiar warmth she'd come to know, are you ready to change some lives? Looking around at the familiar faces in the cafe, faces that had become like family over the years, Maria felt a surge of joy and purpose. This wasn't just a chance to change her own life. It was an opportunity to multiply the kindness she always believed in. With tears in her eyes and determination in her heart, she nodded. Little did she know, this was just the beginning of an amazing journey that would touch thousands of lives and transform not just one cafe, but an entire community's understanding of what it means to care for one another. The next few months brought changes that nobody in the neighborhood could have imagined. The corner cafe remained open during initial renovations, but everyone could see something special was happening. Tom had insisted that the cafe's warm, welcoming spirit shouldn't change, only grow. We'll keep the old counter, he told Maria one morning as they reviewed renovation plans. Right where I sat that first rainy day. He smiled, running his hand along the worn surface. Some things are too precious to replace. The transformation was thoughtful and gradual. The cafe expanded into the empty space next door, but kept its cozy atmosphere. New equipment arrived for the kitchen, making Randy's eyes light up like a child on Christmas morning. But the biggest changes weren't in the building itself. They were in the lives being touched. Their first trainee was a young man who'd been sleeping in the park across the street. Maria had noticed him a few times, remembering how people used to look at Tom the same way they looked at this young man now. She walked over one morning, carrying 2 cups of coffee. We're starting a training program, she told him, handing him the warm cup. Would you be interested in learning to cook? The hope that flickered in his eyes reminded her of the first time she'd offered Tom a free breakfast. Within weeks, the young man, now wearing a clean uniform and sporting a proud smile, was helping Randy in the kitchen. His story spread through the local homeless community, bringing others seeking a second chance. Tom helped Maria set up a proper training program, complete with housing assistance and financial education. The Pay It Forward wall became a neighborhood sensation. Customers could prepay for meals, leaving tickets on a bulletin board. Anyone in need could quietly take a ticket and enjoy a dignified meal. Maria noticed how this simple system created a bridge between those who could give and those who needed help. One cold afternoon, a woman in a business suit bought 10 meal tickets. I was homeless myself once, she told Maria quietly. Someone's kindness gave me a chance to start over. She pinned the tickets to the board, each one a promise of hope for someone else. The local paper ran a story about the cafe's transformation. They focused not on Tom's wealth or Maria's sudden change of fortune, but on the ripple effect of kindness spreading through the community. The reporter spent a whole day watching how the cafe operated, noting how every person who walked through the door was treated with the same warm respect. "You've created something extraordinary here," Tom said one evening as they sat at the counter after closing. The cafe now stayed open for dinner too, offering job training to even more people. "But do you know what makes me proudest?" Maria looked up from the day's receipts, curious. Tom's eyes were misty as he gazed around the space. "You haven't changed a bit," he said softly. "All this success, all these changes, and you're still the same person who offered a seeming homeless man a free cup of coffee." The cafe had become more than just a restaurant. It was a place where business people sat next to construction workers, where students could afford to study for hours, and where anyone down on their luck could find not just a meal, but a path to a better life. Every morning, Maria would arrive early, just like she used to. But now, as she turned on the lights and started the coffee, she often paused to look at the small container of coins displayed in a simple frame near the entrance. Below it was a small plaque that read, "Kindness served daily." The most beautiful part was watching former trainees graduate from the program. Each one would pin their first earned dollar bill next to Tom's coin container, creating a growing wall of success stories. These weren't just employees learning job skills, they were people rediscovering their own worth and dignity. "You know what Helen would say about all this?" Tom mentioned one day, his voice thick with emotion. "She would say this is exactly what the world needs, not just charity, but a place where everyone is reminded of their value as a human being." Maria smiled, understanding now that what they'd built was far more than a successful business. It was a living testament to the power of simple kindness, proof that one person's compassion could spark a flame that would warm countless lives. As the seasons changed, word about Corner Cafe's unique approach spread far beyond the neighborhood. What started as a local success story began catching the attention of business leaders and community organizers from other cities. They all wanted to know how a simple cafe had become a beacon of hope and transformation. One particularly busy morning, Maria overheard two visitors from Chicago discussing their observations. "It's not just about the food," one said to the other. "Look at how everyone interacts. It's like they're all part of one big family." Maria smiled to herself, knowing that's exactly what Tom had hoped to create. The cafe's training program had grown beyond anyone's expectations. They'd now helped over 50 people transition from homelessness to stable employment. Each success story added another layer of warmth to the cafe's atmosphere. The kitchen staff now included 3 former trainees who'd become full-time employees, their confidence and skills growing daily. "Remember how nervous I was about managing all this?" Maria asked Tom one quiet afternoon. They were sitting at their usual spots at the counter, going over plans for their second location. "Now I can't imagine doing anything else." Tom beamed with pride. "You always had it in you," he replied. "You just needed someone to believe in you as much as you believed in others." He paused, watching a new trainee carefully arrange fresh flowers on each table, something Maria had always done herself before the cafe's transformation. The expansion plans weren't just about opening new locations. Each cafe would serve as a community hub, offering not just meals and job training, but also financial literacy classes, counseling services, and support groups. The model was working so well that local government officials had started taking notice. One day, the city mayor stopped by for lunch. Instead of requesting special treatment, she waited in line like everyone else. Maria watched as she chatted with other customers, learning firsthand how the cafe had impacted their lives. Before leaving, the mayor pulled Maria aside. "What you've created here," she said, gesturing around the busy cafe, "this is what every city needs. You're not just feeding people, you're restoring their dignity and giving them purpose." She paused, then added, "We'd like to partner with you to expand this model across the city." The partnership with the city opened new doors. They could now offer more comprehensive support to their trainees, including housing assistance and healthcare. Tom made sure everything was set up properly, using his business expertise to create sustainable systems that would long outlast both of them. The original cafe counter, where it all began, remained unchanged amidst all the renovations and improvements. Regular customers would pat it fondly as they passed, many knowing the story of the homeless man who turned out to be so much more. New customers often asked about the framed container of coins displayed nearby, leading to retellings of the story that never failed to inspire. Mrs. Chen, still a daily regular, often brought her piano students in for treats after their lessons. "This place gives them more than music education," she told Maria. "It teaches them about humanity." The old piano teacher had even started offering free lessons to some of the trainees' children, creating yet another thread in the growing web of community connections. The construction workers who'd been regulars since the beginning now helped maintain all 3 cafe locations. "We're part of the family," their foreman would say with a grin. "Can't let our family's buildings fall apart, can we?" One evening, as Maria was closing up, she found Tom staring at an old photo of his late wife that he placed next to the coin container. "You know," he said softly, "Helen always said that true wealth isn't about money. It's about what you do to make the world better for others." Maria looked around at their created space, at the warm lights, the well-worn counter, the wall of success stories, and the pay-it-forward board full of meal tickets. She thought about all the lives that had been changed, including her own, all because of a simple act of kindness on a rainy morning. "We're not just running restaurants," Tom continued, his eyes twinkling. "We're showing people that everyone deserves a chance to be treated with dignity. And sometimes that chance begins with something as simple as a cup of coffee and a kind word." 5 years had passed since that rainy morning when a seemingly homeless man walked into Corner Cafe. The small coffee shop had grown into something extraordinary. A network of 12 community cafes spread across 3 states, each one carrying forward the simple principle that kindness multiplies when shared. On a bright spring morning, Maria stood in the original cafe, now preparing for a special celebration. The place was decorated with photos telling their story, snapshots of lives transformed, moments of joy, and countless cups of coffee shared between strangers who became family. "Can you believe it's been 5 years?" Tom asked, adjusting his tie as he looked around the space. Despite his success and wealth, he still came to the cafe almost every morning, sitting at his usual spot at the counter. His hair had grown whiter, but his eyes still twinkled with the same warmth. The day was special. They were celebrating their 1,000th graduate from the training program. The mayor was coming, along with news crews and supporters, but more importantly, the cafe was filled with the people who made their success possible. Former trainees who'd become managers, regular customers who'd been there from the start, and community members who'd believed in their vision. "Remember when you thought you couldn't manage one cafe?" Tom chuckled, watching Maria confidently direct her staff. She had grown too, not just in business skills, but in her ability to inspire others to believe in themselves. The celebration brought together people from all walks of life. There was the businessman who'd been skeptical at first, but now ran a similar program at his company. The teacher who volunteered weekends to help trainees earn their GEDs. The banker who'd created special accounts to help former homeless individuals rebuild their financial lives. One by one, graduates from their program stood up to share their stories. A young mother spoke about how the cafe had given her not just a job, but hope for her children's future. An elderly man described how working in the kitchen had helped him rebuild his life after losing everything. Each story was different, but they all shared the same thread of dignity restored through kindness. The original coin container, still displayed prominently near the entrance, had inspired a tradition. Every graduate now left something meaningful beside it, a token of their journey. The wall had become a beautiful mosaic of human resilience. First paychecks, recovery coins, pictures of new homes, thank you notes from families. Mrs. Chen, now retired but still a daily visitor, played the cafe's piano during the celebration. The music mixed with laughter and conversation, creating the perfect backdrop for a community coming together. The construction workers who'd been there from the start had helped build every new location, treating each cafe as if it were their own. When it was Maria's turn to speak, she kept it simple. 5 years ago, she said, her voice carrying across the hushed cafe, I learned that kindness isn't just about being nice. It's about seeing the dignity in every person who walks through our doors. It's about believing that everyone deserves a chance to rebuild their life. Tom stood next to her, tears in his eyes. My late wife Helen used to say that true wealth is measured by the lives you touch, he added. By that measure, this cafe has made us all incredibly rich. The model they'd created was being studied by universities and adopted by other cities. But more importantly, it had changed how people saw each other. Business students sat next to work boots at the counter. Students shared tables with elderly neighbors. Former trainees became mentors to newcomers. The walls between different parts of society had slowly dissolved, replaced by understanding and respect. As the celebration continued, Maria walked to the old counter and ran her hand along its worn surface. The counter had seen thousands of cups of coffee served, countless conversations shared, and innumerable lives changed. It stood as a reminder that the smallest act of kindness could spark something extraordinary. You know what makes me proudest? Tom said, joining her at the counter. It's not the awards or the expansion or even the success stories. It's that every single day, in every one of our cafes, someone is treating a stranger with the same kindness you showed me that rainy morning. And that kindness keeps multiplying, spreading out into the world in ways we may never even know about. Maria smiled, watching the room full of people whose lives had become intertwined through this remarkable journey. The cafe had become more than just a business. It was a testament to the power of human connection, a living proof that when you serve kindness along with coffee, magical things can happen.